Welcome back to another episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Sean Moore. We're back with Whiskey Wednesday, where we talk about hot topics that affect our short-term rental investing journey. We've got Jake behind the scenes, making sure that everything is getting out there, I guess, so you can hear us and see us and everything else. And Josh joining us, and we're going to talk a lot about a number of different things today. And so today we've got on the agenda, no questions, it doesn't look like, or any properties to show off. You guys were a little quiet over the holiday weekend, I guess, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but we're going to go through a number of topics. Today, we're going to hit the June jobs report. It was a little bit of a bloodbath, less than expected. Leisure and hospitality got hammered in that report. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about record July 4th travel and how STR performance data and how the holiday weekend was really a massive success in many ways. We'll talk a little bit about that. Austin has come out and just fired a warning shot. They're going to find out and go after all the unlicensed STRs, and they're going to be delisted, and they're going to the platforms actually and getting them delisted that are not licensed in the Austin area. We'll talk a little bit about that. The insurance crisis. This is a big one. This is something that's been quietly killing a lot of cash flow for a lot of investors, and what you can do about it, how to project it a little bit. And we'll talk about what's going on in the insurance world. It's not something that gets talked about a lot. But it very much affects our cash flow as investors. And so we'll talk about that today. We've got some topics to Josh we didn't get to last week, and actually probably good because we just left a big party weekend, but how Airbnb is bringing back its anti-party technology to block bookings ahead of a lot of these, ahead of a problem, I guess. And so we'll dive into that. And then Jake went and found us one of our favorite reports, which is AirDNA just dropped their 2026, their second half 2026 outlook report that goes into 2027. So we're going to kind of look at how was the projections going into this year, how did we perform based on projections, how the market has changed a little bit, completely threw some of us off. There's a lot of really good things and some things that we need to be watching really close, and then also what they're expecting going into 2027. So that will wrap up the show today. We'll dive into that and probably dive a little bit deep into that. That's a report that we always suggest everybody goes and reads, and so we'll make sure we post that in the show notes. But to start it off, Josh, we're going to talk a little bit about what is going on with as far as the jobs report. It was we only added 57,000 jobs in June. It was the slowest month since February and way below their 115,000 the forecast, 115,000 jobs forecast. So we undershot it by about half. And unemployment it ticked down a little bit to 4.2%. I think projected was 4.3. And so unemployment is dropping a little bit, but new jobs are not out there. Leisure and hospitality lost 61,000 jobs. And so that's a massive loss in this game. Now, leisure and hospitality jobs are seasonal. We're still in the middle of pretty much peak season, right? And we're still, there's a lot of things that World Cup could have had some effect on that. But after losing that many and really paying attention to the jobs report, the reason we watch this so closely as investors is this really goes into what the Fed is watching. They're watching, the economy as a whole. Is it strong? And a lot of hiring indicates a stronger economy. And so when jobs are starting to soften a little bit, that could be, even though it's not as great when you see that the jobs are going down and not as much hiring, it can be a sign that at least the rate hikes that we were looking at, like I still am not a believer we're going to see any rate declines. And as investors, we're watching rates really close, right? And so that's why we watch this stuff very close, because it affects interest rates. Many of us were wrong, myself included, in thinking that we were going to get some rate cuts this year. And we're kind of waiting for that. And many investors have been sitting there waiting for some cuts. It's very evident. In fact, I think I saw the last projection was a 0% chance of a rate cut through June of 2027. And so the most that we can kind of hope for is that things hang out and hover around the same. And the new Fed chair is saying he's not really giving us a lot of projections, but we are watching these types of things. And this is something that is probably a positive sign that we'll at least start to see some rate hikes pause for a little bit, right? Maybe the July meeting that they're going to be having is hopefully another pause instead of a hike. And I think the when you see something like this, Josh, and like a lot of people are like, why do we talk about this stuff so often on jobs reports and the inflation reports and all that stuff? It's because it affects interest rates. And we want to, as investors, it's always great to see, softening rates and rates drop, but rates only drop when the economy is struggling a little bit. So when you see, so it's a kind of a double-edged sword. On one side, if the economy is really strong, but the issue has been the stock market's been hitting all-time highs. The labor market is still very strong, and unemployment is still dropping and less than projected. And so those types of things are very strong indicators for the economy, and not an indicator that we're going to see rates drop. And so, but when we start to see some of the jobs, miss their projections, and the jobs added much less, almost half of what they projected, that is an indication that they could make the argument of, hey, maybe we don't need to raise rates to slow down the economy. We're kind of seeing some softening on our own with a few of the things that are going out there, and this is one of those things. So, Josh, what do you read into that? Anything you want to add to that? I mean,
You know,
it's really just something that we're going to watch on a regular basis.
specifically to what we do in the hospitality class, looking at everything is a 30,000 foot view. Are some of those jobs in this space slowed down for some of those fly-in destinations? Maybe with prices going up, with the jet fuel prices going up, and from the Iran war kicking off at the end of February, did that affect some of the seasonal hiring in some of these fly-in destinations, right? That are truly
Yeah.
truly seasonal, right?
Yeah.
Secondly, and this is something that I'm sure is I don't know how they would look at this, but again, in our space, how many operators are turning, instead of having those middlemen, to AI agents or VA agents, and does that affect the picture not just in this quarter, but over the course of the future to come? That a lot of those middle positions are kind of getting squeezed out with just either like a cleaner that can also do inspections, or instead of me having a host facing individual or customer facing individual, is that now overseas to a VA? In the hospitality sector, how much of that goes into effect of it? But when you see it across the board with all the other sectors, there's a lot of other pieces in play as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're exactly right, and I think you hit it right on the head. The fact that leisure and hospitality bled 61,000 jobs during what is supposed to be our peak summer hiring season, that's something that we should be really paying close attention to in our world. The paradox is travel demand is hitting record highs, and so how does that happen when the labor market, behind the hospitality industry is contracting? What that tells me is while consumers are still spending money on experiences and travel, the businesses are getting more efficient, and there's more tools out there, and they're cutting their cost, and they're getting leaner, and they're not needing as many people. And so that is, both things can be true at once, right? And so we're seeing that maybe we don't need as many, people doing certain jobs that are now, because in our industry specifically, we were a little bit behind having enterprise level tools available to us. Now that short-term rentals have become really mainstream and very much a mainstream asset class, now you've got institutional investors investing into enterprise level tools that we can all tap into. What that does is allows us to be more efficient. We don't have to hire as many people. And so I think that that's kind of more the signal of what we're seeing. And while all of these things are stacking up, that the Fed is probably less likely to hike, and maybe borrowing costs have peaked, and a lot of people are still sitting on the sideline. If we can make things work in this environment, we need to be doing so, right? Don't be sitting there. You're probably not going to see any indications of a drop until mid next year. And so why would you pass up deals if you can make them work in this environment? But you don't want to celebrate just yet. The labor, there's a lot of things that always are happening, and we're watching demand, we're watching, cost of what's going on, we're watching all of these things that are happening to make sure that we can make, but overall, what we're looking at is demand is high, labor is getting cut during what in our world is our peak hiring season. That tells us that these businesses are getting more and more efficient. Efficiency means a little bit more money in our pocket. And so if we don't have as much labor to deliver, and the consumer's still spending money, all of those things at the end of the day, at the bottom line, is we might have a lot more tools to help us. I don't need to go hire 4 people to help me on the management side. I might only need 1, or if I'm managing myself, I've got these tools I can tap into, and that makes me leaner and meaner. And while rates are high and cost of houses are high, it still allows me to now go operate and at a more efficient level, which means more money in our pocket at the end of the day to make these deals work. And so those are the kind of things that I'm watching and paying attention to when we see that, because it does seem like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, and both things can be true at once. We're shedding a lot of jobs, not adding during a peak hiring season. That tells us that's not a slowdown, that's a full-on stall out, right? And so what that tells us is that businesses are getting more efficient because the demand is not dropping. They're not hiring people or not building their businesses because the consumer demand is not there. Demand has been there and continues to grow. And so I think it's a sure sign that in our world, things are getting more and more efficient.
Right. I mean,
So
like even like I'll just touching on that, just on efficiencies, our cleaner, right? So this year, this whole last year, we've been talking with her a good bit on how not, but she's amazing, but she's looking to grow. She's looking to expand operations. But little things of saying, hey, instead of me trying to do the laundry on site, instead of me trying to do all this, she basically converted her garage into like a miniature laundromat, hired a bunch of other staffers, and now they can turn twice as many units in half the time because they're not having to stay on site to do laundry. And now they have storage for any of the units they run. Each unit has their own little storage area within that garage for extra linen, stuff like that, right? And our linens get turned off site, right? And
yeah,
that just massively increases the amount of time, the amount of units they can turn with a lower staff. And also, if with efficiencies happen, like those bottom level employees, you're not needed as much anymore, right?
yeah.
And that's something like with skilled labor, where if you have a skilled labor position, you're in high demand right now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And speaking of demand, record travel demand, and we saw, hopefully everybody had a safe and fun July 4th weekend celebrating America's 250. It was a lot of fun. We were in Orlando for it. Lots of different parties going on, lots of things. We were right in the epicenter of what has always been kind of the short-term rental world, and watching all the people that were coming in and renting those properties and having a lot of fun. But we AAA said there was a record 72.2 million Americans traveled 50 plus miles or more for July 4th. That was up from 71 million in 2025. 64.1 million drove, 5.8 million flew. So lots more drive-to destinations are getting fed, which is one of our strategies and has been at Vodyssey for a long time, is really to hedge against a lot of the things going on in good times or bad times. Those drive-to destinations seem to perform and much outperform those fly-to destinations, and we saw that a massive amount of those people were hitting the roads and driving to these destinations. Short-term rental ADR, average daily rate, was up 5.5% year over year from last year, driving a 12.4 increase in RevPAR. RevPAR is even going up, and we'll talk a little bit about that. RevPAR is just basically all the money spread across all of the supply, right? Revenue per available rental, and that's not a key indicator that we look at overall for our performance, but what it is it is absolutely a key indicator of that demand is outpacing supply a little bit, and which makes sense. Supply projections were way down. We'll dive into that here in just a minute, where less properties were hitting the market, and so it was really clear that RevPAR was going up for everybody because supply wasn't coming in because rates are high. Prices are high. People are sitting on the sideline. Nobody's buying homes and putting them into the market. And so that was driving some of that RevPAR. 22 out of the 25 markets analyzed showed a positive RevPAR growth. And so it was very broad based, where we're pulling this from key data, not concentrated in just those hot markets. It was a mix of a lot of different markets. So a lot of positive signs. And on the demand side, pointing to the summer, despite the gasoline prices up 28%, airfare up 20 plus percent, Americans are traveling in record numbers, and it does not seem to be affecting them too much. The one of the big winners in the hospitality world is hotels. Hotels were just they were well outperforming their year over year. The hotel demand for July 4th was up 48% year over year. So all the way around, short-term rentals, hotels, travel industry overall worldwide is, and specifically here in the US of what we're tracking, is up. And so demand's there. People are spending money. And so it is, and it was a record holiday weekend. What are your thoughts around that, Josh? And what are your takes on that?
You know, two things are happening right now that have not happened at least in 7 years.
Yeah.
One July 4th on a Saturday,
Yeah.
right? And that changes a lot of dynamics from saying a Saturday to Saturday check-in, which is common in many of these peak markets, right?
Yeah.
The way just, hey, hotels, hey, it's versus a Tuesday versus a Saturday. You also get a Friday off now as an observed holiday, right? And so there's some dynamics that we don't see every 7 years, right? Secondly, in these major host destinations, we've got the World Cup going on, and it's America's 250th anniversary, right? Or birthday, right? And so there's a lot of factors there that if I saw the same numbers next year and I saw a massive decline from 2026, I wouldn't consider it doom and gloom if everything was looking good, normal outside of those major factors that don't happen every day, every 250 years, every 7 years, or every time we host the World Cup, which is once every 20, 24.
Yeah.
Right. So in general, I'm looking through all that data over the course of the entire peak season. Let's look at that data from there and see if those numbers are still representative or if it's just from that, Saturday, July 4th demand. Right. And that was a different thing in general. Like, usually you have a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, July 4th, Saturday, July 4th. We had our twins just turned 3 yesterday. We had their birthday party on Saturdays. Everyone was coming over anyway. It was two birds, one stone, or the twins, three birds, one stone. So,
Yeah, yeah. It's what nobody's really looking at or talking a whole lot about is the travel costs are significantly higher. They're up over year 20 to 30% almost in some of these areas. But people, and specifically Americans, are still traveling in record numbers. And that is not just a sign of resilience. We always say the US consumer is very resilient, right? That's really a fundamental priority shift. That is, people are saying, hey, I'm going to choose experiences over stuff. They're willing to go in debt for it. What we found was 74% of travelers who used credit cards for last year's vacation still haven't paid it off. Now, that's not a good thing as far as financial health, but it tells you something very, very important about demand, that it is not rational. It's
yeah.
emotional. People are traveling because
Dave Ramsey is sitting there like this right
yeah,
now, right?
exactly. Which that's okay, right? But at the end of the day, we know that, and we've been talking about this for years, that the consumer, we keep saying, and I've said it over and over, the consumer is so resilient. The consumer is so resilient. What we're finding is they're choosing this stuff as a priority, and they're willing to even go into debt over it. And so the money is flowing into these markets that deliver those experiences, not just beds. And if you want to play the game, you need to understand where consumers are spending the money and why they're spending the money. And we need to understand that people make emotional decisions, not always logical or necessarily smart decisions. I know a number of people in my very close world that should not be spending some of the money that at least I believe they shouldn't be spending the money that they do on some of the experiences and the travel that they do based on their financial situation. But they're saying it's a priority. Hey, listen, we only live once. This is what we're going to do with our money. I don't care if we go in debt over it. And they will justify it and make sense of it. And we're seeing that across the board because costs are up, yet demand is still there, and the travelers are coming out and showing up in record numbers. And so, but they are spending their money on certain things, right? And they're saying, hey, listen, we want experiences. We want to feel like we're getting some value out of the dollars we're spending. It was large properties, and this shows in the AirDNA report we're going to dissect here in just a minute, is the large homes are doing very, very well because it is an economical way to travel. I was just in Orlando. I was telling you, we were going out to eat, and most nights we would go out to eat. We were seeing groups of 20, 30 people, right? There's families of 4, 5, 6 families that are all traveling together. The resort we were staying at, we were in the Reunion area in Orlando, and all of these bigger properties had 30 people in them, and there's 5 or 6 families splitting the costs, and it is an economical way to travel, and we're seeing that across the board as far as what the consumer is wanting and looking for, and how they're justifying it doesn't really matter. What matters is they're spending their money, and they're saying this is a priority to us. This is not us on travel and a trend or a fad. They're saying, listen, we want experiences, we want to go do this stuff, and we're willing to go into debt over it in many cases. And I don't know that that's always a good thing, right? Long term, if somebody's still paying off a vacation that they took last year, I'm definitely not a proponent of that. But I also, if they're spending their money, I want them spending it on my property because they're going to spend it somewhere else, right? And so let's make sure we're delivering a great value and getting them to choose ours above and beyond everybody else's. And so, um, the regulation side of the world, this is a very interesting one. I don't think we've seen this yet. That Austin is firing a warning shot for unlicensed STRs and being delisted this week. As of July 1st, the city of Austin began requesting removal of unlicensed STR properties from booking platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo. The platforms must remove unlicensed listing within 10 days of the city's request, and they may not collect booking fees on unlicensed properties. And so this is very interesting. I have not seen this, and there are also unlicensed operators are facing city fines of up to $2,000 per day. And so that's a very aggressive move for Austin to be able to get out and say, hey, listen, if you're not licensed here and you're not allowed to operate as an STR, we're not even tracking you down. We're going straight to the listing platform and having them remove you. And it's very interesting. I have not, and maybe this has happened before, and I just haven't paid too close attention to it. But for this is the first time I've seen the cities going and publicly saying, as of this date, we're going after you, and we're going after the platforms and telling the platforms you're not licensed to operate, so you're not allowed to collect any booking fees on these properties. Very interesting. What are your takes on that, Josh?
Yeah, I love it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Is like if you cross the T's, you dot the I's, and you do everything right, and then your city, the municipality, the county that you pay your taxes to, that you pay your licensing to, that you have to adhere to all their rules, and they're enforcing the non-licensed operators, right? That you can't do this without playing the same game that everyone else is. I think that's great. That's wonderful. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I think that's perfect. And you see that, not knowing that specific market, but we know Austin is a massive travel hub right now, right? And if you go back
Yeah.
15 years, what's Austin?
Yeah.
Compared to what it is today is insane. So from them is like, hey, we want to make sure that you're licensed. We want to make sure that we're getting our revenue, not because of bad greed, but since like, hey, we have safety regulations in play. We have neighborhoods, we have, school zones, all these things that you have to adhere to get a license to do it. And if you're operating outside that, we're not going after you. Is like you're chasing a ghost, going directly on the platform saying, hey, you can't rent this residence can't rent anymore, right? Cool. Now you got to go underground to do something else because it's no longer going to happen. I personally like it. I think that type of behavior to where the city, county, municipality, whatever, can have some sort of say is like, hey, these are operating illegally. These are causing problems, whatever it may be. I mean, you see that with bars and restaurants, right? You can have a
Right.
liquor license from a state or whoever issues that in your state. But if you're a nuisance and you keep having problems or shootings or fights or issues within that county municipality, they can pull that license without the state's approval. They don't need it anymore, right? And I think you're seeing the type of regulation coming in that it helps everyone play at the same level. And I think good operators will benefit from that, and those who are trying to skirt the law, there's a stop in it. I'm all for it.
Yeah, we've always been and always have been, always will be saying, hey, listen, if I can't get a license and a permit, we're not going to operate there, right? And so I want to make sure that we're operating the way that we should be, and the way that these cities or counties or states, most of them are cities and counties or HOAs, are are wanting us to operate. We want to be, good neighbors in those areas. We want to be good hosts to those cities. We want to add to the economic, growth of some of these cities. And Austin is showing every city in America how to actually enforce STR rules. You don't need to just go find the people and chase people around. Cut off their Airbnb listings, right? You can have somebody behind a desk looking for properties, scraping a property, scraping their system. Is it licensed? No. Send out a notice to Airbnb to get it off. And that seems to be not a bad model for some of these cities because it's much easier than driving around and trying to figure out, all these how to track down the owners and find the owners. Just get them off the platforms, right? Get them off the areas where they're getting their bookings. And what that is actually good news. I would agree with you that it's good news for those compliant operators because every unlicensed listing that gets pulled off Airbnb, that's less competition for you, right? That's less supply that you have to go compete against. In Austin, we could see a meaningful supply reduction even as soon as this month, right? Which means the operators who did the paperwork, who got the licenses, played by the rules, were able to see their rates go up, their competition go down a little bit. Demand is not going to go anywhere. And so those people are going to have less properties to choose from. If you do a great job, means higher rates, more occupancy for you. So it's something to watch and see how effective that is. It'll be very interesting to see if we can pull the data in a future episode of how much supply actually went down, how effective it actually was, if supply actually did go down in the Austin market. So we'll have to have to watch that.
We could see that on. I know we use AirDNA. It's our preferred data source. So we're also a partner with them and everything. But in general, we can see that as a probably August 3rd, August 4th, right? When it goes back to the July ticker, like it's like supply growth, and usually in July you're going to see growth. It may flatline or decrease, and then looking at a couple months on the road, hopefully, if that goes well and that playbook works, this is a way for other cities and municipalities and those that have chronically had problems, your New Orleans, your New York cities, perhaps a way for them to follow into these steps and have a better all around experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, and I think the key is, I mean, some of those cities are full on closed out cities, right? They're not allowing short term rentals, so that's an easy way for them to just go. You just go to Airbnb and say, hey, listen, you can't do this. Now, I don't know if Airbnb, do they have to comply? Does Vrbo have to comply? I'm not sure. It seems like they do, based on what we're finding out. But we'll see what really happens if they have to remove them, right? Is it their responsibility to follow the request of those municipalities, right? And so we'll watch it. But it is, if that's the case, that would set the precedence moving forward for a lot of these municipalities. The easiest way to police it is just to go get them removed, right? And so it will I guess the jury's still out of how effective it will be if they do have to remove them. Airbnb, Vrbo, if the OTAs do have to comply to those requests to remove them, I think it could be very, very effective for these cities to remove properties that are not licensed or permitted to operate as an STR. So moving on. This is a topic none of us like. Insurance. First, I hate paying for insurance. It's a necessary evil in all walks of life, but it is really kind of a crisis that's quietly killing a lot of investors' cash flows, specifically in the short-term rental world, but really in real estate investing in general. Homeowners insurance premiums are projected to rise 8% in 2026, another 8% in 2027, and that is on top of those cumulative increases we've seen really since like 2022, 2023. We've been dealing with insurance premiums. Most of these properties are up 20 to 40% in many markets over the last few years. And in some areas, some of those hurricane type areas, Florida, Louisiana, even parts of California with the wildfires, some areas you can't even get insurance. And if you can, it's doubled or tripled in cost. And so this is a big deal where insurance premiums are quietly starting to kill properties that were doing well, right? They were cash flowing properties, right? We're able to buy a property, we fix in the rates, and we have fixed debt service and all those things. This is a variable expense that continues to go up on us. And if it goes up every single year and we didn't project it, and we're not projecting in those increases and forecasting in those increases, it can be really a killer to the performance of our properties, or what we were planning on the performance to be with these properties. Josh, you live in South Carolina. You're no stranger to insurance premiums rising, and we're seeing, for those condo owners, which I know you own a condo, HOA fees are going up because that's where your insurance a lot of times is baked into some of your HOA fees. But what are you thinking about this one?
One, in general, insurance is a line item expense. Yeah. However, it's a line item expense that we have no control of, right? Yeah. You look at Southwest Florida when Irma, I think, hit like the Cape Coral, Fort Myers area, right? And those properties, their insurance was X amount of dollars, relatively going up by Y amount of percentage every year, and then the next year it's doubled or tripled, and now that's skirting by the property, skirting by the break-even property is now a cash flow negative property. And usually in a lot of these oceanfront properties, it's substantially negative. And you're seeing, $15,000, $20,000 premiums on average property, right? And but if the numbers still work out with that, I mean, we've talked about this before, I believe. If you're able to underwrite the property with today's rates, right, and today's insurance premiums, you're set up for better success in some ways than someone who underwrote when they was really cheap a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And now I can't, my cash flow projections are what they are. And what do I need to do in that position? When we first bought our condo, like literally a couple weeks after that, we had a massive assessment happen. So our HOA that we came into was a very different price, but it wasn't a huge change. Where we are, luckily, our complex was built in 1982, so just cement and good old American rebar, right? So our wind and flood is very minimal to that. But in general, that's something you've got to look at. We have one of our other an old client of ours. They had a property get damaged in Fripp Island. It was an oceanfront property, and they bought a property, the second row, strictly because of insurance purposes. Revenue numbers were almost exactly the same. The insurance premium was less than half, and just literally being across the street, right? And something they had looked at when they rebuilt after the damage. They were going to build this lot over here instead because we're not touching that again. So I think, and you see some of those properties, the ones you see in the Outer Banks, you know what I mean? And those properties are slowly washing away, and people are just running them until they fall into the ocean type mentality. No insurance coverage. They're not going to move the property. You see that, but in general, I think that's you've got to look at that. That's got to be on your forefront of your underwriting. It can't be after you go under contract. That needs to be way before. We can even look at these markets. What is the insurance rate? Because that is going to be a big piece of your underwriting, especially in these coastal markets.
Yeah, it's funny because everybody's been obsessing over interest rates for the last couple of years since they skyrocketed on us. But really, what's affecting your investment more than anything is your insurance cost. The cash flow is being, you're stealing 20-40% of your cash flow. It's the most under discussed threat in STR investing right now, really real estate investing in general, and really home ownership, right? We talk about the cost of ownership going up in some of these markets. We're starting to see deals where the insurance payment is bigger than the property tax bill, in some cases bigger than the HOA. And the reality is, if you bought an STR in Florida, in 2022, like you said, when rates were lower and things were all less, you're actually probably in a worse position because the property's not that insurance cost is such a significant cost to your or stealing so much of your cash flow that it's not performing like you thought it was going to perform. And many times the culprit is those insurance premiums that have been going up so significantly over the past few years. And to your point, if we can underwrite in today's rates, today's prices, today's insurance costs, and the property still works, we're probably in a much better position long term because we're underwriting at these higher amounts. However, we're still seeing rates in insurance go up. So it's very important that you need to be shopping those rates. Don't always auto renew. Look at what the policy's doing. Look at how it's changing every year. How much more are you paying? Is it way more than the national average on things going up? Or is it because there's some companies that they got you as a client. They know you're probably going to auto renew. And all of a sudden you're looking and you're like, man, my premiums went up 25% when everybody else's is only going up 6% or 5% or whatever it is. I was talking to one of our investors, Dan Gorman and Dan and Claudia, and they have a nice portfolio in Tampa, Florida market. Their insurance premiums are actually going down because they started shopping them. They started looking around and seeing what was available. And so you want to make sure that you're not just set it and forget it with your insurance policy. In our world, we are looking for very specific type of insurance policies, short-term rental specific insurance policies. They're already more expensive because they cover us on a lot more stuff than just a regular homeowner's policy, but always something we need to be looking at and making sure that those, if they are going up, they're going up at a rate that's not just exorbitant compared to the market. The next thing is you need to model those insurance premiums going up, and you want to model in those increases on that line item, right? Model in a 10% increase every year. That doesn't mean that your costs are going up 10%. That means that one line item on your pro forma is going up 10%. So, but that could be, a 2 or 3% increase in your cost. And so make sure you're modeling those things into the underwriting so that you're saying, hey, listen, if my insurance is going up by an average of 8% every year, model in a little bit more conservative, a 10% increase on that insurance, and make sure it underwrites on a 5 or 10-year pro forma, right? So you're not underwater as those rates go up. And then the next thing is make sure that you're really considering the cost of insurance as you select your markets. You might be looking at a number of different markets to invest in. And one of the criteria now could be, what do insurance costs look like in these areas? And it could disqualify some of these areas that are just getting way out of and typically it's going to be your wildfire areas and your hurricane areas. Those are going to
You
be the
know,
markets that are skyrocketing the most. But consider it as part of your market selection criteria because it is something that is a real needle mover when it comes to the performance of these properties.
we have seen something else, on the back end from the marketing side, right? So we do lifestyle photography, and that's kind of what my company does. And we have seen from our condo to even units we've shot to where you have a pool, right? And maybe you put the giant pink flamingo or white swan in the pool, and then the next year you go to underwrite, and the underwriter comes back and is like, hey, you know what? If you're offering this giant swan, this is not a life-saving device. If you offer this, you're out of compliance, right? And
Right.
if a consumer comes there and they stay in this property and you have this giant white swan and they drown on it, whatever, we're not going to cover you, right? And those little even or hey, we put bottles of beer or a glass of wine on our hot tub, right? Not only do you have glass by the pool deck, which is probably a big no-no somewhere in that insurance liability, but you're saying alcohol in the hot tub, right? And so
Right.
we actually discuss it with a lot of our clients and say, hey, we're going to give you a couple different options of shots, right? And so like with alcohol, without alcohol, we're going to have this, we're going to take the swan out, right? And if it comes back, part of what we've had to do with our unit with we love proper insurance. Proper is like, hey, we basically have to, say in our listing, like, these flows are not part of your experience. We don't
Yeah.
offer these pieces here. We actually have our cleaner. We have a storage unit for like beach gear and stuff. She goes down there every other stay and removes. People will leave like noodles and
Yeah.
floaties
Yeah.
and stuff, and we just have her remove it and throw it away, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a liability thing. If something were to happen, heaven forbid something were to happen, you know what I mean? Your insurance company is telling you like, we're not going to cover you if this happens,
Yeah.
right? And it's just an easy fix.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And it's something that we want to watch though and pay attention to. We don't talk about it probably quite as often as we should, but definitely something that needs to be underwritten when we underwrite, obviously within our Vodyssey family, and we're doing these underwriting. It is a major thing that we discuss, making sure that we're planning for some of those increases, planning for the increased premiums, or selecting markets. And so those are all things you can do as an investor to stack the odds in your favor that this does not become something that really kills your deal after you've already bought the property and you're like, man, I got this winner. And then a couple of years down the line, because the rates have gone up so much, it kills the deal. We don't want that to happen. So moving on, let's talk about the Airbnb bringing back their anti-party technology to block bookings ahead of finalizing reservations. Airbnb is saying it blocked or redirected more than 20,000 potential high-risk bookings over last year's July 4th weekend. It reports that fewer than 0.06% of U.S. stays now result in a reported party. Also, one of our members just had a potential scam that they were able to avoid due to their cleaners having time-stamped photos of the property. So, Josh, I'm going to come to you with this, but do we think the Airbnb is protecting hosts or costing them revenue when it comes to this? And should hosts be able to override AI guest screening on their properties? Is it preventing parties, or is it just putting stricter pressure and stricter STR rules on our guests that ultimately is costing us money? What are your thoughts on that?
I think Airbnb is protecting Airbnb first,
Right.
right? And then
Always.
if someone else gets protected in the side, that's who we're doing it for, right?
Yeah.
In general, some of the things that I've seen in the last year or two of how that process works is essentially like last minute one night bookings from local people that don't have it, brand new account, right?
Yeah.
And it's like this red flag. It's like, hey, your license or your place or whatever says you live in. I live in Lexington, South Carolina, and we're at Lake Murray, and then you rented a place for one night, like 3 houses down from you, or down the street or whatever. We just had a party in our neighborhood a couple weeks ago. We talked about a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and they're no longer a rental. The county stepped in and basically pulled their license, and now they're a long term rental, right? I do think that the host should have the ability to say yes, but the host needs to be educated, right?
Yeah.
If the host is just looking at the money side of it, Airbnb is like, hey, we think this could be a scene for a party, and the host is looking at the dollar amount and not the risk factor, right? And that's something they should.
Yeah.
And then Airbnb could be like, hey, well, fine, you take this. We're not going to. You don't have air cover for this
Yeah.
property if there's a party, right? I don't know how that would work, and that seems to maybe violate TOS in quite a few ways. We have had members mention on the we have a Tuesday Ask Me Anything call with you every week, and it's we've had members mention like, hey, I had someone that couldn't book, and they had to go through another platform or book with me direct, and they could not get themselves booked with a friend of theirs, right? And so
Right.
so I'm not against it if it's gonna fix it. One, we can always typically, if you have a desirable property and you're top of the market in your comp set, you don't usually have those issues because you kind of priced out bad behavior,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, a bad actor isn't doing this to spend money; they're doing it to save money, right? They want
Yeah.
to wreck your house because they don't want to wreck their house, right?
Yeah.
In general, I think how does Airbnb vet their guest profiles, right? How hard is it to fake a license? How hard is it to fake that account? Where's the money coming from? If you're using mom or dad's credit card and you throw that party, mom and dad are now legally liable. Or are you buying an Airbnb gift card? Right.
Right.
The member, he has not have his member. He mentioned not to have his name yesterday, but in general, new profile, books his property right this peak season right now, the market he's in. They were there, sent a bunch of pictures of saying the place was destroyed, and then his cleaners I actually send the same app to my cleaner, and essentially it provides a timestamp photo with like clearly what it is. Obviously you can Photoshop that, but on the back end, if there's ever questions, you can export the actual timestamp log to Airbnb or VRBO. And it got overturned, and he kept his share of the cancellation money for what wasn't covered there. Was that a scam? Because they kept trying to call him versus like staying on platform and all those things that are usually red flags. He did things the right way. He's a Vodyssey member. He knows how to do things. We teach that. Here's the right way to do this the right way. And probably could potentially dodged a bullet there from someone trying to pull the wool over their eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't mind Airbnb honestly trying to scrape some of those party houses. You're exactly right. We're going to naturally try to stack the odds in our favor and limit those types of guests coming in because we're typically going to have higher price properties, more expensive properties in the markets that we're operating in because that's where the money's made. So you're usually those party houses are going to go into some of the, they're not going to want to spend the money that we're charging, right? And so we do avoid some of that, but I would love to have, none of us want the party houses, if you will. I always, Teresa's like, don't call people riffraff. I saw plenty of riffraff when I was in Orlando, and it's a dang good thing that I don't manage my own property because I kind of am removed a little bit from that. I'm not like, there was a lot of parties that were going on at these houses that were just the guests that were staying
Right.
there. Right. So I don't know how you determine what's a party and what's a not, because there were some of these houses that I was seeing that were 20 or 30 people there. And there was a lot going on that looked like a party, but it
Right.
was, they're probably just the group that was there and then getting a little bit rowdy. And I think that happens in our properties. And for me personally, being removed from it is a good thing, but we want to be, like, we don't want that type of wear and tear on our properties, but also, like the riffraff usually doesn't rent our properties too often because they don't want to spend the money that we're charging. And so Jake's laughing. I don't know what else to call, but what I saw was definitely riffraff.
Yeah.
And so, it was, and if Airbnb can help screen some of that off of away from booking our properties, then we want that. I'm all for it, right? And you're right; they're doing things to protect Airbnb, and they might cost us a booking or two. But at the end of the day, if you have a really good property that performs really well, you're going to be just fine because you're going to rebook it anyways. If they accidentally were a little bit too strict on their screening process, I'd rather have that than just allow anybody and everybody to come in our property. So, I'm not really mad about this one.
Something, and you don't manage your own properties, right? But any host has this ability to essentially, you can set, at least with Airbnb, with your PMS, whatever, you can set to where someone with a good track record can essentially book your property immediately. It's called Instabook, right? And that gives you, some exposure. Airbnb likes that. However, you can say, hey, if they don't have any reviews or they're a new profile, right? They don't
Mhm.
have any reviews from other hosts, they have to request to book, right? And that is something that's like, hey, we're looking to come here for A, B, C, D, E, and you as a host have a right to decline them if you feel that there's a party risk or something like that. And we with us, we've had people that have asked, request a book, and I won't say all the time, I won't say even half the time, I will say about 1 out of 4, about 25%, we've declined because they'll be like, hey, you know, we see you only sleep 6. We want to bring 8. Can we just bring some blow up mattresses? No, you cannot. You know what I mean? Like decline, right? Or hey, we're coming in for a 21st birthday party. Oh, so you know our HO regulations are this, whatever or insurance regulations are that. So in general, it's not that feature helps protect our property. And a lot of times, what you see, those horror stories you see, a lot of times are not set up that way. It's an instant
Right.
book for anybody that wants to come in. Even when you're a new property, a new guest can't book you, right? It has to be a seasoned guest for your first 3 rentals, right?
Yeah.
And then it goes to where however you want your setting set up. It's a simple setting you can put in place. And I think in general, it is a good protective measure at this day. Like, like the majority of your guests have been on Airbnb before. They're not first timers, and you have the ability to kind of screen the guests on the front end. You have your damage waivers and stuff involved as well. Not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but in general, I think it's a no brainer setting to have on your accounts.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jake's having he's typing in notes. Jake's mic is normally we'd have Jake behind a mic, but we're having problems with the mic with some feedback today. So he's not having a mic, but he's bringing up noise sensors, right? Now, noise sensors on these bigger properties, 100% in favor of. And because some of those bigger properties, like there was like this weekend, I go back to just being, we were in an area that was a whole bunch of people celebrating the 4th of July weekend. And there were certain properties that the noise sensors for sure would have gone off, and reminding them that, hey, listen, there's other people around here as well, and it does cut down on that, and does report back. In fact, I think Airbnb is one, they're in favor of those, and might even give you some incentives or some things to go put some of those in your property, right? And so
Yeah, it's
it
where you actually have them. There's some in the TOS. Just knowing this answer, right? There's like certain places where you can and can't have like any type of recording device, right? Even the
right.
sensor decibel level, it's outside. It's not an intimate area, right? You know what I'm saying, right? And those areas are allowed,
Well,
and other
yeah,
areas are not.
right, yeah, but if you can have them in a living room, like you can
Yeah,
have them out on the patio, like in the main areas where normally people congregate,
right,
that's where your parties are going to happen, right?
right.
And so, yeah, I get we can't put them in bedrooms and things like that, but it's in the main areas, they still are going to cut down on a lot of one, the you can shut down a party, but also just the if people are getting a little too loud just in their normal, enjoying the property, they can get a reminder that says,
Yeah.
hey, listen, tone it down just a tad because
And
this is getting.
it's automated, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
goes out through your PMS or whatever.
yeah,
Your insurance, if you're using an exterior camera on your front door or whatever, does your insurance know that? Because you actually get a reduction for
yeah,
doing that,
yeah,
right? And for having those regulations in place, for having those pieces in place, those safety devices as they call them, you get an insurance reduction for most of your carriers on that. So if that's why it's so important to shop around and have that conversation with your broker or your agent, whoever it is, because you may be overspending on a product that you don't know you get discounts on.
yeah. And Jake just pulled it up. Airbnb does run incentives for a program that gives hosts a free noise sensor and a free short subscription through a partnership with the property tech company Minute. And so
Yep.
it is, yeah, everybody encourages it, from Airbnb, our insurance providers, everything else. As us as hosts, I actually think it's one of the best things, way better than cameras, on just being able to kind of keep those parties in check a little bit.
I
So
mean, like,
again,
also it's a protection. It's like, hey, yeah,
yeah,
if you have an issue with a guest, you have to have them the cops come, whatever it may be. You have time stamped data and everything there that you need for your defense
yeah,
to say, hey, this has been happening. I mean, not just a neighbor calling or whatever that may be.
yes,
We have proof of this happening, right? And
right.
it protects you, but it protects Airbnb, and that's why Airbnb likes it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, though, I do think that parties are few and far between. I like that Airbnb is trying to screen them for us, but even according to their data, less than 0.06% of properties of bookings report a party, and so we're definitely talking about the minority, not the majority of stays that are happening out there. And so we'll move on. I'm excited to dive into this report for the last couple minutes, and really, really encourage everybody to always find out. AirDNA does a really good job with their Outlook reports. and really tracking a lot of different things. We're going to hit on a couple highlights of it, but I really will post this in the show notes for those of you that are interested to go read this report. And I would definitely suggest it. The title of it is U.S. 2026 and 2027 Outlook Mid-Year Update. Says a better year to own than to buy. And so it's really, we're going to tap into a few of the different things, but at the start of the year, it was saying we were kind of expecting falling interest rates, stronger supply growth, solid year for demand. And the year had a lot of different plans for us because of the conflict in Iran, the energy shock that followed, borrowing costs staying higher than expected, rates not coming down, travelers getting nudged toward value focus, drive to destinations, really reshaping where the strongest opportunities were. But the short-term rental market remained remarkably strong. And so Americans continue to prioritize travel. We talked about that earlier. The wave of new listings we expected to come into the market with rates dropping did not materialize. And so what that did is all the hosts that were in the game, demand's going up, not a lot of new supplies coming on. And so that's a benefit for all of us that are already in the game. And so it is something that we were watching at. I'm just going to scroll through a couple of these key points, and I'll stop on each one that we kind of talk about overall. But the path is still very optimistic, right? And so what we're seeing and what we projected was a little different than the reality, on the first year projections, but the reality was still very strong demand, just not as much supply coming in to the market as expected. But what they're seeing is, as far as the overall economy, incomes are going down, and we expect them to go down a little bit in 2026, but rebound in 2027. Inflation is going to take a little bit of a bite out of some of the consumption, but really not like the post-pandemic inflation that we saw. So we're seeing a little bit of an uptick in inflation, but nothing that is really affecting our world as much. Home prices staying high, mortgage rates staying above 6%, no decline projected when it comes to that in the near future. But here's where some of the trends we're seeing are kind of we've been seeing them, but they're also saying, hey, listen, these are kind of getting, like, we're going to put an exclamation point on these, because the trends are shorter trips are happening, later bookings are happening. And so when the guest is starting to say they're prioritizing value, but really flexibility, and they're liking the drive to destinations because they're drive to, people have the flexibility to book more last minute, and they're also shortening their trips. And so some of you that are in markets that we've always said, hey, listen, we do maximum 2-night bookings, and many of our properties now we're doing 1-night bookings on, and we're really trying to say, especially on smaller properties, we understand that the consumer doesn't want to be guaranteed or have to book a 3-night weekend or a 5-night week during the summer season. And many old school property managers are telling hosts that's just how we do it around here. Well, the data is not showing that, and the data is showing that the more flexible you can be with travelers, the more that you have with your cancellation policies. They want to book last minute, they want to book shorter trips, and they want to they're still saying, I'll spend the money, and I'm not really valuing the cheaper properties as much as I am the higher price properties, but I want the flexibility. And so something to really start to think about is those trips are shortening, and they're booking closer to the date that they're coming into. And we've been talking and seeing this really for about the last year and a half, 2 years that we've been talking about this. And this report is really highlighting the fact that that is an absolute trend that they're seeing and expect to continue. Josh, where I'm going to pause on that, because I know that you do the same thing with your property.
Yep. I mean, I had a great teacher. Thank you. But in general, the consumer's going to buy what they want, right? And if you restrict them from what they want to buy, they're not going to buy from you, and they're going to buy from somebody else, right? Yeah. So especially if you're a peak season, we're in a beach market. We make 85% of our money from March 1st to Labor Day. 85% of our revenue is right there in that window. I'm not worried about occupancy there, right? I wish I had more nights available, right? I'm not worried about that. We had a 3 days were open, or only 3 days pretty much in all of July were open. They were next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right? We didn't soften our prices. We knew someone was going to pick it up, and it was picked up last night. And this morning we woke up to the last 3 open days we had through mid-August were just picked up. But we knew it was going to be. Now, the off season, right? You get into shoulder seasons or whatever, maybe you're more urban market. If the guest wasn't coming down for the weekend, you're not really worried about like, oh, how do I feel my Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? You're how do I maximize my prices when the consumer wants to buy? Right. And you're trying to
Yeah.
force, and you were talking to someone on Tuesday's AMA call. I think they had their rates relatively too close for a weekend destination market, and the weekday rates were, hey, if you want to book the weekday rates, those rates are going to have to come down because the consumer doesn't want to buy those days. Right. If you
Yeah.
can maximize your rates here, raise the rates here, lower your rates there, you'll make more money with less
Right.
occupancy when the consumer's not wanting to buy that. You try to force them, and hey, you have a 3-day weekend now. If you work a Monday to Friday job, there is no 3-day weekend,
Right.
right? And you can maximize your gap day strategies where you sell them Sunday if they're driving, if you're in drive-through destination, or maybe an early check-in on the front end. But if you try to force them into a box they don't want to be in, you're going to be stuck empty because other higher level operators are giving the consumer what they want.
Yeah, it's and that's exactly it. Give the consumer what they want, and they want flexibility. They want to say, "Hey, listen, I want to travel the way that I want to travel. I want to drive to. I want to look last minute." And a lot of them, you can get them to book further out if you have a very flexible cancellation policy. Let them cancel. Let them cancel all the way up until the time they check into the property. Now that's really scary for a lot of people. We've talked about this on other podcasts, but we do that because we want to give the consumer flexibility. And I would rather have a little bit longer lead time and give the consumer the opportunity to book it, but know that if something happens, they can cancel. It gives them that confidence to book something like that. Otherwise, they're just waiting it out anyways.
Yep.
And this really comes down to pricing data and understanding pricing in your market, because booking windows tend to respond to economic conditions. And if the economy is a little bit dicey and shaky, well, the booking windows start to get shortened, right? And this particularly happens, and we're expecting, at least on this forecast, expecting economic conditions to worsen toward the later part of 2026 before we rebound in 2027. So if that trend, if booking windows tend to respond to that, we're going to expect shortening of the lead time, shortening even more later in the year. And so that means you need to understand your pricing. Don't put discounts on if your average booking window shrinks to 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever that is. Don't start discounting 30 days out, because that means all you're doing is leaving money on the table, right? And so you really need to pay attention to this stuff, because if you know, and you're not paying attention to the average lead time in a booking window, or your property manager is not paying attention to it, and they just automatically set discounts within 30 days, most of you are leaving a heck of a lot of money on the table on properties that would have likely booked at their regular rate anyways. And
Right.
and you bring a good point up on, we talk about this a lot, is that delta between your weekday and weekend prices. And many times the consumer, like, people will have these very similar prices midweek as they do weekends, and it might be a weekend market when you really need to be pushing those weekend prices, and maybe lower in the weekdays, but more likely pushing the weekend market or the weekend times when you actually are having the guests wanting to come in and book, and they're likely to book kind of last minute. They will pay, and they will pay premium prices. They just want to have the flexibility of when they're coming and how long they're staying. And
If
that's what.
you Most of your dynamic pricing software understands that, right? And you need to understand the dynamic pricing software, not just trust it everything for you. But if you
Yeah.
look at, for us again, beach market, middle of July, peak travel time, our Monday rate and our Saturday rate are not that different. As we
Yeah.
get to the shoulder season, those numbers are very different, right?
Yeah.
Double, right? One Friday, Saturday is double price to what it is, Monday, right? And at a certain point, you're going to put a floor because you just don't want to go below that, because I'd rather have the property empty at a certain point. So that's seasonal. But in
Yeah.
general, so you should see that if you're doing your own manual pricing, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're not getting the bookings, I mean, the tech is there, the AI is there to help you with that. And a lot of times that pricing is, to your point, you're leaving money on the table. You're discounting just 30 days out. We discount. Why? Does the market tell you that? Is there data that's telling you that? Or is it just a blanket? It's an easy cop out for us to actually do revenue management.
Right, exactly. And I think it's, most of the time it's an easy cop out, right?
Yeah.
And so you really need to look at the data and what the market is telling you, and understanding, how to make these decisions. And or hire property managers that really understand how to make these types of decisions as well. The other thing that we're seeing in this report, and it talks a lot about, is why luxury listings keep winning, right? The other force that keeps shaping guest behavior is we've talked about the K-shaped economy, in which higher and lower income households are moving in completely opposite directions in the economy, right? And so with a lot of the things that are happening at the top end, where the stock market's been booming, there's certain sectors that are doing really well. It's left wealthier households feeling a little flusher than what you see on the news with the lower income households, and they tend to spend a lot of money on travel. And so travel tends to skew toward the higher end earners. That wealth effect has continued to support short-term rentals, and why we say, hey, listen, let's make sure that we understand who is spending money. If it's the wealthier traveler who's spending money, let's give them what they want, with one, the flexibility that they want, but also give them a reason to pay more, and to where we want to operate the top of these markets, because that's where the money is being spent. We're starting to see that the nightly rates on the budget side continue to slip, nightly rates on the luxury side continue to go up. And that's something that has been trending for a couple years now, and it's really, you're saying, okay, where is the money being spent? I need to make sure I have properties that are doing that, because I can't just say, okay, well, I have a mediocre property or a middle of the road property, and I'm going to command luxury rates. Well, the buyers are still smart, right? They're going to still say, hey, listen, you're not a luxury property, right? And so if you didn't do what it took to create that unique experience and that elevated experience for the guests, they're not going to pay you more. But if you do, that is where the money is being spent, and that's what this report is showing us. And we've been talking about it for a while too. It's just following the numbers, following the data, and AirDNA has always been, and in our opinion, the gold standard when it comes to data. And this is a great report to go watch and check out and read in depth. It talks about the bigger listings and how they continue to lead. All of these different things that we're mentioning, and these reports from AirDNA are really good. We'll put the link in the show notes. We're going to wrap it up for today. We've been going for a full hour, and so we won't go and dissect the entire report, but there's a lot of really telling things in that report. And then also, I love that they project forward, and then they look back at their projections, see where they were right, where we were wrong, what we need to consider moving forward again into 2027. And so always really good information to pay attention to. So guys, we're going to wrap it up for the day. Always appreciate you spending your time with us. And those of you that are starting to join us live, we appreciate that. Always, as a reminder, I don't know how you do it, so I can't tell you exactly how, but if you can figure out how to put on those platforms you're watching live some questions in there, Jake will definitely know how to find them. And so put them in there, and we'll get those questions answered. Even on the show, we can get interrupted and get those questions answered live. It's great. You can always email in questions to support@vodyssey.com. We'll answer them on an upcoming episode. And those of you listening to the recording on whatever platform you're listening on, give us a thumbs up, a review. Those things help us. If you have somebody that would be interested in listening to these conversations, share the show. Those things are very, very helpful, and you don't have to listen to a whole bunch of ads and sponsorships while we're talking, because everything we do is organic growth, and that is thanks to you guys and your continued support of the show. We hope it's helpful. We hope you walk into this game with your eyes wide open, and some of these conversations, help you maximize your success and avoid some of the mistakes that you might have made without the conversation. So the final most important thing I ask you at the end of every episode, pick that one thing you can do today, start building that life you don't want to take a vacation from. Cheers, my friends. Cheers, buddy.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. Share this with other people you think need to hear about it. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Hey Grace, is there a website?
Yes! For more amazing content and expert advice, visit Vodyssey.com.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.